I'm awfully sorry for this delay, but I want, on behalf of the President and the CEO, to give my best welcome to your coming to this center, and to give a seminar in our center on behalf also of the CIRO organization, of which the President is Professor Ferrario. So I just give a welcome to you, and maybe later on we can make a visit of the center. And sorry to the audience because of this delay. Please, Professor Ferrario, you can introduce the speaker.
Thank you very much to Professor Franco Salvatore for hospitality of Change Center for hosting this seminar. This is the first seminar in the frame of CIRO infrastructures, and so we have the pleasure to have here Professor Aydogan of Ozcan. The title of presentation is Virtual Staining of Label-Free Tissue Using Deep Learning. I would like to give just a few biographical note to Professor Ozcan. He's a Chancellor Professor and the Volgenau Chair of Engineering Innovation at UCLA and Professor with the Howard Hughes Medical Center. He's also Associate Director of California Nanosystem Institute and is a fellow of National Academy of Inventors. He's a very prolific scientist with thousands of papers and more than 65 international patents. He's also an entrepreneur with launching several spin-off on biomedical science. Has been awarded many prestigious prizes from many the best scientific organization all around the world. So it's a great pleasure to have this first discussion about connection between engineering and medical science, how medical science can benefit from new development about engineering. So thank you very much, Oyde. You can start your presentation.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation, Pietro. Thank you. So, in the next 45 minutes or so, I'll tell you more about some of the work that we have been doing at UCLA on computational imaging and sensing and its applications to biomedical space. So, just briefly at a top level, my lab is focusing on computational imaging and sensing systems, all the way from mobile microscopy techniques to holography to point-of-care sensing, and of course the intersection of deep learning with optical microscopy to enhance optical microscopy with deep neural networks. So when we first started this line of research, smartphones were not as smart, and we were barely able to see maybe red blood cells, but it's come a long way, and now you can actually use your smartphone to look into even DNA molecules that are labeled and quantify their size. In addition to imaging, I'm also very interested in my lab on sensing, creating different kinds of sensors that are mobile. In a nutshell, we're trying to democratize advanced measurement tools so that they can actually function in our hands, in our pockets, in field settings, at the point of care, and various other application needs, working as good as their lab-grade counterparts. For example, this one is a mobile phone-based dark field fluorescence microscope. It's a very inexpensive attachment to the back of a smartphone camera, and these are individual nanoparticles that we were able to image with this kind of inexpensive microscope. In fact, if you were to do immunohistochemical staining of these viruses, you can do viral count of the patient. These are human cytomegaloviruses that are being stained and imaged with a cell phone, giving you a viral count specifically by counting these nanoparticles or these viruses with the capsid protein being stained. Using a similar design, we were able to actually use very inexpensive, simple silane chemistry to stretch DNA molecules and image them. This is actually a cell phone-based microscopy image. If you zoom in, you'll be seeing these individual DNA molecules that are labeled with intercalating dyes, giving you the resolution to quantify a few kilobase parasizing accuracy sufficient for looking into gene mutations with these kinds of inexpensive microscopes. This one is another example that several years ago we worked in collaboration with a Swedish group. This is a multimodal mobile phone-based microscope. So the same device can do bright field imaging and fluorescence imaging at two different color channels. Here we use this mobile microscope for targeted DNA sequencing and in situ mutation analysis. We looked into colon cancer patients to look at single nucleotide base mutations where using rolling circle amplification based on mutant, we labeled them with one fluorescence color and the other one with another fluorescence color, so that at the tissue level you could superimpose them to do basically DNA sequencing, targeted DNA sequencing and mutation analysis. These were tested with colon cancer patients, showing that it really works as a readout for these advanced assays. So it's come a long way. When we first started, we were using these types of microscopes attached to a smartphone. This was actually not a smartphone as we know today. You could barely see a red blood cell with these kinds of inexpensive microscopes, but within a matter of just a couple of years, you were able to see even individual viruses, bacteria, and even DNA molecules to be analyzed. Sometimes we take the imager chip off a smartphone camera and create these standalone devices. These are holographic microscopes, handheld holographic microscopes, performing basically diffraction-limited imaging over a large area. Different than a traditional light microscope that you might have in your labs, these are lensless on-chip microscopes where the main component here is the CMOS imager sensor from a cell phone. So this is the same 10 megapixel, 5 megapixel imager that you have. And this sample in a transmissive geometry goes in front of it. So this is literally sitting on the CMOS imager. And we capture holographic patterns of the samples. There is some additional illumination unit here, some LEDs. Basically, they turn on and off to create subpixel level shifts. The framework behind this kind of a microscope is pixel super resolution, which means rather than looking at a single frame that is low resolution, we look at a few, maybe 5 to 10 frames, where they're slightly shifting with respect to each other, and we synthesize a super result image. This is macro scale. We do this at the micro scale, but there's nothing mechanically moving in these designs because we turn the LEDs on and off digitally. This is work from 2009, 2009, 2010, and that's how we take, for example, a CMOS imager and create 1 billion useful pixels out of it. For example, this one is a CMOS imager taken from literally a mobile phone based microscope. Over its entire active area, we can create diffraction limited holograms based on this pixel super resolution framework and reveal deeply sub-pixel level features. The pixel size of these types of sensors today is about 1 to 2 microns. So you can have, with unit magnification, with on-chip geometry, a very large field of view, like 20 millimeters square, more than 20 millimeters square, and have a lot of useful pixels on the order of 1 billion useful pixels created for imaging these samples. One of the major advantages of this system is not just portability, it's also field of view. For example, if you look at a traditional light microscope that is about 40x objective lens in this case that you're looking at, this is the field of view that you can see. Lens-free on-chip microscopes can see larger areas. This is a histopathologist slide where you can look at a very large area. Raw holograms are shown here. These are rapidly reconstructed to reveal the subcellular features that nicely match a traditional light microscopic image of the same thing, except the field of view is on the order of 50 to 100 times larger than a traditional light microscope based on objective lenses. You can also bring color to these holographic microscopes by using the Bayer filters that we have, RGB filters that we have on CMOS images. You can illuminate the sample simultaneously with red, green, and blue channels and decompose them into actually 3 holograms. This is a pneumonia H&E stained image with a lens-free microscope. You can zoom in and continue zooming in to reveal subcellular features that are basically coming from these holographic microscopes. These were examples of what you can do with CMOS imagers that are literally coming from cell phone-based cameras. But we don't have to restrict ourselves to just the CMOS technology. You can actually also use CCDs, charge-coupled devices. This is a CCD that has an active area of about 18 centimeters square, very much like your palm area, within which you can do holography and generate, in this case, about 1.5 billion useful pixels. So 1.5 gigapixel imaging can be achieved. These are reconstructions of the holograms of sperm flagellum, can be nicely seen. And this is occurring across an enormous area. One of the key signatures of lens-free holographic imaging is field of view and resolution are decoupled from each other. So in traditional light microscopy, these two quantities are tied. If you improve resolution, in traditional lens-based light microscopy, if you want to improve resolution, you have to sacrifice sample volume or sample field of view. In these kinds of on-chip microscopes, they're not tied to each other, and that's one of the most intriguing elements of on-chip microscopy. Which means if you want to keep resolution the same and buy yourself some field of view, upgrade your 10 megapixel, 20 megapixel imager to a 50 megapixel imager. That gives you, without any optics, without any redesign of a lens or objective lens, directly doubling of the field of view while keeping the resolution the same. It's probably one of the most important aspects of on-chip microscopy compared to lens-based microscopy, in addition to being compact and field portable. So on top of handheld microscopic imaging using computation, we're also very much interested in point-of-care sensing. These are some of the earlier generations of devices that we've integrated with smartphones. For example, for sensing bacteria in drinking water, milk, or waterborne pathogens like Giardia cysts in drinking water, we've created interfaces that combine analytical chemistry with imaging of a mobile phone to create these kinds of sensors. This one is an ELISA plate reader. Some of you, at least, I know, must be using high-throughput screening formats like 96-well plates. This was actually an ELISA test reader to read 96-well plates. Without any mechanical components, in a single snapshot, you can have all the 96 wells to be imaged with a fiber optic system within that enclosure here. It works with fluorescence, chemiluminescence, and colorimetric assays. And we've shown that this is actually working as good as an FDA-cleared ELISA reader. We've tested this device with more than 1,000 patient samples to show that it's actually on par with a clinical reader. Some of this work has been commercialized. For example, this one is a diagnostic test reader. It reads lateral flow tests. In 2009, I started up a company to read diagnostic tests of various different kinds. This actually still works as a product. We were acquired in 2018 by another company that still is using our technology to read and quantify different types of diagnostic tests. So it's actually come a long way, not just proof of concept, but commercialized and still being used in the hands of our customers. So these were some examples of what we do with computational imaging and sensing for mobile imaging. Another very exciting aspect of our research group is at the intersection of deep learning and microscopy. How can we use deep neural nets to enhance optical microscopes from the perspective of biomedical sciences? So we were the first group to apply deep learning to enhance optical microscopy. This is actually 2017, and the first issued patent on this is also from our lab. And we actually did not focus on image segmentation tasks or looking into different features of an image. We directly went into image formation, image reconstruction, and image transformations enabled by deep learning. For these types of image reconstruction, image enhancement tasks, we like deep learning because these are universal function approximators, but once you train them, which might take you a couple of days to a couple of weeks, depending on what you want to do, they remain fixed and they perform the reconstruction in a single feed-forward manner, non-iteratively. A lot of image reconstruction modules of today are iterative, but that's changing, and that's, of course, being replaced by neural networks. So we started this line of research in 2017 to really show that it can replace a lot of the iterative algorithms to improve holographic microscopy, to solve inverse imaging problems. One of the first modalities that we applied deep learning was bright field microscopy. This is a tissue section that was imaged with a low resolution, low NA, low numerical aperture, bright field microscope. We've shown that you can enhance the resolution and depth of field of microscopy, bright field microscopy. We've also applied it to smartphone-based microscopy to take care of color aberrations and resolution loss by training neural networks to do transformations of smartphone-based microscopy images into diffraction-limited benchtop quality images. We've also used this to enhance the resolution of confocal microscopy, beating the diffraction limit of light. And of course, holography is dear to us, so we also use neural networks to reconstruct holograms. The first reconstruction of a hologram using a neural net was also from our lab to show that it's approximating some very interesting features of a traditional physics-based reconstruction module. These are not just exotic transformations, they are very useful. They empower neural net-based reconstructions, empower mobile imaging, mobile sensing devices. For example, this one is an imaging flow cytometer that's based on deep learning and deep learning-based reconstruction. It's a shoebox, which is a label-free imaging cytometer where we image within an hour something like half a liter of liquid volume. And these are plankton samples that we've imaged as they were flowing through the sample with a speed of about 1 centimeter per second. So, and everything here is reconstructed in real time using basically neural networks running on a GPU. This is already a product where, especially for algae blooms, this is going to be very important because fishermen suffer from losses of their crop because of rapid bloom of algae, which is sometimes toxic for the fish. And we're targeting these kinds of handheld mobile imaging flow cytometers to understand those toxic events before they cause issues. This is a major problem with global warming. It's actually causing a lot of problem globally. You may be surprised about the scale of this. In 2016, right before COVID, Chile, for example, lost $800 million in a couple of weeks. $800 million just because of algae blooms. Florida, again before COVID, in just a summer lost about $130 million just because some of these plankton, as they grow rapidly, they kill fish. So you need better measurement technologies. This is a label-free technique, so it's great, no chemistry there. We have another version of the same system, which is at the intersection of deep learning and holographic imaging, and this is, we call it C-Air. It's a device that is a label-free bioaerosol sensor using mobile microscopy. So this device at the heart has lens-free holographic imaging, what I've introduced at the very beginning of my talk. So right here is behind this enclosure, you have a holographic on-chip microscope. This is the nozzle inlet. This has a throughput of about 13 liters of air per minute that is sucked up rapidly. So within just a minute, it takes 13 liters of air and deposits on a transparent substrate for us to understand before and after we suck that air, how the number of particles on the substrate change. So that's going to reveal what we are sensing, the particulate matter in air or other types of bioaerosols. So we've shown that we can achieve more than 94% classification accuracy for classifying different types of pollen and different kinds of mold spores with this kind of a technology. So it's a label-free sensor because this is a colorful holographic imaging system. It captures holograms at red, green, and blue channels. So based on the contrast of the sample, we can also recognize different types of pollen based on their shape, spectrum, and it gives you a label-free fingerprint that we can recognize. So this intersection of holography and sensing is also applicable to other more exotic tasks. This one is actually a stain-free plaque-forming unit detector, PFU detector. Some of you working on virology, looking for different kinds of compounds to look into slowing down the growth of viruses or their replication, might have worked with viral plague assays. Basically, a viral plague assay is an assay for understanding the replication of viruses. This is a holographic unit that can go inside an incubator, and this is actually within the incubator how the system is working. It's taking the entire image of a 6-wall plate in this case and doing time-lapse imaging, and it's trying to understand, based on label-free signatures of cells, virus replication and counting them at an earlier time point. Basically, through these time-lapse holographic label-free images, with deep neural networks, we're creating PFU probability maps at a given time. Every one of those yellow points, the neural net is thinking at that time point that it is viral growth there. So there is a PFU forming, a plaque forming unit appearing there. So that means as it's continuously imaging every 30 minutes, it's giving an updated PFU map for you. If it's enough, you stop it, and within the incubator, it's going to tell you, hey, you know, I have the PFU count for you. This is simpler, it's stain-free, it's rapid, it's quantitative, and it reports from the incubator. There's no need for a microbiologist. Nobody has to go inside and read these. In fact, it saves a lot of time. So this is actually VSV. It's a virus where the traditional ground truth plaque assay is 48 hours. So after 2 days, you come and then you stain it. These are stained samples. This is negative control, and this one is positive control. Every one of those white things here, that's essentially the plague assay. And after 48 hours, you count them. We've shown that you can do this the same with much better contrast and resolution at 17 hours, based on neural nets looking at spatiotemporal changes of those tiny refractive index optical path length delay that we did time-lapse imaging with a lens-free scanning microscope. In fact, this is not just overfitting to one type of a virus, not just VSV, vesicular stomatitis virus. You can actually try this with different types of viruses. This is herpes simplex virus, type 1, HSV1. This one has 120 hours. It's a slow virus. It replicates slowly to kill cells. That's why the ground truth takes literally 120 hours. And this is after staining what a microbiologist would count. Literally, they would count one by one after 120 hours. You can get a very good sense of what's going on in 64 hours, giving you almost half the time saving with these probability maps coming from these time-lapse images. And this is another type of a virus that we've shown. It generalizes beautifully well to even a third type of a virus, showing you that this is resilient to different types of viruses and their viral replication method. Major advantages are, again, label-free, within the incubator, automated, and it reports quantitative results of PFU much earlier. So these are examples of where deep learning can be used to enhance microscopes or to repurpose microscopes to work like sensors of different kind. All of these were at the basis of a physical forward model that we could understand, and we could actually solve some of these problems, image enhancement problems, through standard inverse solutions based on a physical understanding of what's happening. And that was the basic step of how, the first step of how deep learning impacted optical microscopy, whether it's bright field, holographic, or fluorescence. But perhaps arguably, the biggest impact for deep learning on optical microscopy has been on approximation of unknown functions through image data. Unlike these, here I'm going to be talking about things that you cannot physically have a forward model. You don't have any other way. For example, you can take a hologram and reconstruct it in different ways based on Maxwell's equations. Yes, you can do that. But here I want something different. I want a function that is beyond my understanding based on physics, chemistry, light, matter interaction. And I want to approximate that function. So, okay, this is abstract. Who cares? Who cares for that function? Let me give you a little bit more insight what that function can be. Let's say that function is going to be targeting this transformation. It's going to be autofluorescence images of samples that are label-free. And then at the output of the function, I want bright field equivalent images of the labeled versions of those samples. So this function f is beyond our understanding. Modalities are different, fluorescence and bright field. I cannot relate them to each other. Label-free to labeled, it's chemistry. How do I mix them together? It's beyond a physical understanding, understanding of a forward model. That function I want to approximate. That's where supervised learning comes into picture and powers us to learn those functions. If I could learn that function, you may begin asking, who cares? That's virtual staining. If I can do that, I can actually change the histology workflow that happened to be the same for the last century or so. So we can change the entire century worth of workflow if we could approximate that function f. That's exactly what we've done here by supervised learning. We actually take tissue samples that have no contrast. If you don't label them, if you just thin section them, there is no contrast that is valuable to your eye. In fact, that's the reason why for the last 150 years, pathologists needed a contrast agent like H&E stain or other types of stains. Through the histochemical staining workflow, they were always looking at stained samples, mostly chromophores, sometimes fluorophores of different kinds, giving you subcellular features in contrast. Now, this is the standard clinical workflow. We want to make this obsolete, and we want to stop the workflow here, take unstained tissue, label-free, and capture its autofluorescence image. Native, nothing exogenous. No fluorophore of any kind from outside. This is your human tissue staining, human tissue fluorescing. Now, this neural net is my function approximator that's going to take that f, function of f, to be approximated so that from the end user point of view, you won't be able to differentiate if it's stained by our network or coming from histology. In fact, you will prefer most likely this to histology because of human errors. How do I know that? Because I did that work. We work with pathologists. They like this more than that. I'll give you examples of that. So at the heart of this is generative adversarial networks. These are generative models that are conditioned. So it's not like other artistic models where we heavily condition these generators. That's why there's a structural loss term here that balances out the discriminator loss here. If you just leave this loss term here, this generator will be artistic. It's going to create samples that never existed. And pathologists don't like to diagnose patients that don't exist. That's why we conditioned so that generator is actually faithful to the input images. Input images are beautiful, diffraction limited, autofluorescence images of the tissue, and that's helping the generator to remain faithful to the tissue microstructure at the nanoscale. At the end of this game theoric fight between this discriminator and the generator, nobody wins. We have a beautiful generator. You put it in your pocket, and that's your virtual histotechnologist. That's what stains the tissue. In the next few slides, I'll share with you examples from new patients. These are samples never seen before. So that's pure generalization performance of the network at test. We're looking at salivary gland. The target is H&E. This is what comes out of histology. Per whole slide, this is a couple of dollars. It's cheap, fast, 2 hours to get a good H&E from a human histotechnologist. We can do this in less than a minute using DAPI contrast channel. There's no external fluorophore. DAPI is the filter set. So it's endogenous fluorescence. These are the beautiful diffraction limited images that are contrast enhanced just for your eye. What goes into the network is BNF. Beautiful virtual staining, rapidly, non-iteratively, matching apple to apple what comes out of histology after a couple of hours. It doesn't only work for H&E. It also works for special stains. Special stains are more expensive. For example, this is kidney tissue. Oftentimes, diagnosticians would require Jones-Silver stain. Jones-Silver stain is 10 times more expensive than H&E. It's about $10, at least at UCLA. And it takes 3 hours. This is a tedious stain. Under a microscope, it takes 3 hours to create. We can create it in the same amount of time, a couple of minutes per whole slide, and nicely matching what comes out of histology with just the DAPI contrast channel. Some other examples from new patients never seen before: liver tissue, lung tissue. Autofluorescence contrast is shown here, beautiful diffraction limited images. Virtual staining results are shown here, and then what comes out of our histology lab is shown here. This is a third stain, Mason's trichome. It's another special stain, and this stain is also about $10 per whole slide, so you can also make it chemistry-free and much faster. It takes also about 3 hours to get a good Mason's trichome. By the way, when I say it takes 3 hours, I assume you have the technician. Most labs in the world, resource poor, they will never stain Mason's trichome because this is out of their training. So it's not like commodity. It requires a good infrastructure, and not every hospital would have these. It doesn't only work for these kinds of simple chromophore-based stains. It also works for more exotic immunohistochemical stains. How many of you ever seen an IHC, immunohistochemical stain? Immunohistochemical stain? No. So these are antibody-antigen reactions that are being stained here. Think of a cell expressing a certain protein, like, for example, HER2 protein. I hope nobody is diagnosed with breast cancer, but those patients who are diagnosed with breast cancer will have this kind of a biopsy to be after positive diagnosis. To determine the target of therapy, they will look at the expression of HER2 at the cell level. For example, this is overexpressed HER2. And this is a stain that takes 24 hours. This stain takes literally 24 hours in a histology lab. It's very expensive. And as you might imagine, not everybody can do this. So a lot of times hospitals outsource these to different labs. We can do immunohistochemical stains because autofluorescence is molecularly rich at the diffraction limit with 200 nanometer. So we can actually label these kinds of antibody-antigen reactions surrounding the cells accurately and do IHC immunohistochemical stains of tissue. This is kind of like the king of all types of tissue staining. In general, it's very difficult and tedious. These were engineering matrix from the perspective of virtually stained, histochemically stained. Histochemically stained, virtually stained. Kind of like, hey, yeah, they have the same resolution, structural similarity, peak signal-to-noise ratio. They all match. Good for us. But at the end of the day, they need to be matched from the perspective of the diagnostician. How does the diagnostician think about these images? So what we did here is a blinded study where we took a group of board-certified pathologists and give them, without knowing which one is which, a sequence of images. 50% were histochemically stained, 50% were virtually stained, and they didn't know which one is which. We asked them to quantify quality of these stains. Nuclear detail, cytoplasmic detail, extracellular fibrosis, they were quantifying it. Based on these kinds of analysis, we can say there's statistically no difference between the two types of staining. Chemical staining, slow, human-based mostly, versus virtual staining, AI-based, more consistent. In fact, we went further ahead and we created tables like this, many of these, where we asked them to diagnose conditions of the patient, not just quality of the stain. We gave them a bunch of cases, these are board-certified pathologists, and asked them diagnose the condition. We know the condition of the patient because we know the health record of the patient. And at the end of this comparison, blinded, pathologists basically had no statistically significant difference in their diagnosis using deep learning-based virtual staining as opposed to standard of care histochemical staining. So, which shows that it's not just engineering the beautiful looking realistic images. These are at the molecular level, at the subcellular level, preserving diagnostic features that relate to the patient's condition. But there are so many advantages of virtual staining as opposed. It's not just matching histochemical staining. It's not performance-wise matching. It's surpassing it from various different points of view. First, we standardize staining quality. Look at, for example, this panel here. These are tissue sections coming from UCLA Health, all stained with H&E. what you immediately notice there is stain-to-stain variation. This happens all the time. Diagnosticians don't like this variation. What do? If they don't like the style of the stain, they send it back, which means stain me another one. They cut another block from the tissue and then stain it and then send it back. We are consistent because virtual staining is consistent. It will stain the same way. And in fact, it might be even tailored to the needs and desired preferences of the diagnostician. Consistency is very, very important. The other and perhaps even more exciting aspect of virtual staining is this. From a single cross-section, that is imaged with an autofluorescence microscope, we can create infinitely many stains that we want. So I can create a stain cube from a single cross-section. For the last 150 years in histology, nobody could do this. Because every time you want to stain another stain, you take another cut in the tissue block and you stain it. That's why if you take, for example, histochemical staining and a panel of stains needed for that for the diagnosis, they all look different because they're coming from different tissue blocks. And that's essentially the reason why you give secondary biopsies. How many of you have given a biopsy so far? Okay, so you're very healthy. That's very good for you. Sometimes you will give a secondary biopsy. The patient will be called back and you'll be wondering, why? I gave my biopsy sample, why? Well, if you're in that situation of giving a secondary biopsy from the same organ that you gave a week ago or a month ago, you know why? Because traditional histology killed it. Every time they did some analysis on it, the tissue was gone. It's like a potato. Slice it, stain it, it's gone. And that's the reason why a lot of secondary biopsies are because of this destructive nature of staining. We don't destroy tissue, we preserve it. As a result, we won't ever call you back for a secondary biopsy. That's good. So what other contrast forms can be used for virtual staining? Everything so far had this grayscale autofluorescence at the input, which is beautiful, which is very powerful. But that's not the only contrast mechanism that we can use for virtual staining. You can have other types of microscopy, label-free microscopy modalities giving you contrast. One of my favorites is holography. Let me go back. One of my favorites is holography because I like holography because it's computationally very rich. And it's also label-free. So we also established another functional transformation through supervised learning, which takes label-free holographic reconstructions and converting them into bright field equivalent transformations of the labeled version. Now, this is even more difficult. The reason is this. Holography in this case was single wavelength, bright field was colorful, and label-free labeled. So I cannot establish a transformation like this from the understanding of light-matter interaction. It's really beyond our capabilities, but supervised learning was the key here. We call this phase stain. It takes phase images, quantitative phase images, and virtually stains them in a label-free format. This is, for example, an H&E being transformed from a QPI, quantitative phase image, at about 550 nanometer wavelength, giving you a beautiful H&E image. These are some blind testing results from new patients. This is skin tissue section. Probably they're looking at some sort of basal cell carcinoma here. So this is the phase signature that's being transformed into H&E rapidly, matching nicely what comes out of histology through the QPI channel. Some other examples are shown here. Jones stain, Mason's trichome. These are, again, more expensive, 10 times more expensive and more tedious than staining H&E. The inputs are shown here, label-free QPI of kidney and liver tissue sections. Holography is not the only other label-free modality. In fact, we can use reflectance confocal microscopy as well. This is different than the previous ones. Previous ones were acting on biopsy tissue. So it was thin section ex vivo. We're now doing biopsy-free in vivo virtual histology using reflectance confocal microscopy. This is actually a device that looks like this. This is a reflectance confocal microscope, RCM in short. It's FDA cleared for dermatopathology use. So in the United States, some clinics in dermatopathology field, literally use this to look into depth of the skin all the way down to superficial dermis layers, dermal epidermal junction, to understand, should I biopsy or not? A lot of skin biopsies are false. They don't reveal positives, right? So why should I leave a scar and, you know, extra burden on the healthcare system? That's why this reflectance confocal microscope is a great way to capture a deeper structure of the information of the microstructure of skin, maybe about 100 microns into skin. But they reveal contrast that dermatopathologists are not trained for. So here we were taking these reflectance confocal microscopy stack of images with some delta Z depth between them and revealing an H&E like image in real time, which means this is now performing virtual H&E in vivo without a biopsy using reflectance confocal microscopy. These are movies showing how it works. This is the standard mode of operation. Again, this is FDA cleared. This is really in vivo imaging of the patient's skin, non-destructive. It doesn't even hurt, right? It's just, you know, wavelength scattered from your cells. This is the reflectance confocal microscopy image that is changing from depth to depth, and this is the network's model inferring H&E in real time as the images are being scanned through the skin. So a dermatopathologist will be looking at these kinds of features to kind of say, okay, I want to take that lesion out, or no, it's good, it's benign, or it doesn't need a biopsy, come back in 6 months. What I'm showing on the right is external generalization. What I mean by that is the model was trained with a standard benchtop reflectance confocal microscope. So that's the model of inference for virtual H&E. And we were saying, okay, there is a handheld version of the same device. It's a different optics there. It's a handheld, it's a different kind of a microscope with the same principle of reflectance confocal microscopy. Now, I take the model trained on this device and blindly apply it without any transfer learning on this handheld mode. It works beautifully well. That's probably very surprising, but the most important reason behind this blind inference here with a new type of a design here is the fact that the input to the network is a sequence of images. It's many depth slices given into the input, which probably regulates the network to look at a volumetric data as opposed to just a single slide coming from that. This was actually a great external generalization test between different types of handheld versus standard mode of operation. These are examples of label-free to virtual staining. So that means pick up your favorite label-free tool. Autofluorescence, reflectance confocal, quantitative phase imaging of various different holographic modalities. Pick up your favorite label-free tool, and you can do virtual staining. And if you can have that transformation, think of it like a map of cities. I'm from the label-free city. That's where I was born in. And I went to a label A. And then I went to a label B. And then I went to a label C. Formed a network of cities. If I can form them, I can also go from label A to label B. Label B to label C. Label C to label A. That's very powerful. That means as the anchor being label-free imaging, going to different stains, I can do stain-to-stain transformation because every label-free to label stain with respect to the other stains are nanoscopically registered. They're coming from the same root. That makes learning very powerful, which means now you can do stain-to-stain transformation. Why is this important? Why should I care for label A to label B to C transformation? Because sometimes it's too late. It's already stained. Think of H&E. In your databases and in this institution, I'm sure there are thousands and thousands of H&E images that you've stored somewhere. Well, good. What if you want to look at the same tissue section with another stain? You cannot do it now because that stain is gone, like that tissue is gone. We can do it now. We can take all of your H&E in your databases and transform them into any stain. Not just for H&E to something. I can also do anything to anything. And that's very powerful because then I have access to your data and I can transform them into different things. We've shown the utility of this for diagnostics. So here we're using stain-to-stain transformation to improve the diagnostic accuracy of board-certified pathologists. Here We're using stain-to-stain transformations to take histochemically stained H&E. Let's say this is standard clinical workflow. It came out of histology, stained already. Okay, you can make a diagnosis out of this. Or wait for special stains. What we're saying here, don't wait for special stains. We'll give the special stains instantaneously, which means as soon as you see the H&E, which is relatively fast, I can give you all of these. Do they help your diagnosis? Yes, it does. We've shown that with board-certified pathologists looking at a bunch of kidney patients, kidney disease patients. We've shown that based on H&E only diagnosis, if we give them H&E plus virtually transformed other stains, PAS stain, Mason's trichome, Jones-Silver stain, they improve their diagnosis statistically significantly. About 46% of the cases were better diagnosed with our stain. And the remaining, about 48, was the same. It means it matched the diagnostic accuracy. There were some discordances there, mostly diagnostician errors. So, all in all, deep learning-based tissue staining, whether it's label-free to labeled or between labels, is going to be really transformative. It's going to save expert time and label. It's going to save reagents, personnel time, staining equipment, chemicals. We also preserve tissue, which means we most likely will not call the patient back again for an unnecessary secondary biopsy. We can do multiple stains from the same cross-section and superimpose them on the same nanoscopic grid, which is for the first time happening in histology. And finally, I want to say that it's actually standardizing staining quality, which is very important for diagnosticians, but it's also very important for AI. If you are an AI pathology researcher, you probably want to train your models with virtually stained images at the input, as opposed to coming from a lab from Japan, a histology lab from Europe, a histology lab from, let's say, US, because they all have their own variations. That's not good. We're commercializing this technology. In 2019, I started up a company and did all the fundraising and all the heavy work during the COVID pandemic. We raised about $19 million. Pictor in Latin means painter. I searched this up. That's what I do when I start up a new company. I search Latin. If the Latin doesn't give a good name, I go to Italian. And one of my company's name is called Lucendi, because that was a good name for a holographic cytometer. So anyways, Pictor means painter. We're painting microstructure of tissue. The contrast with respect to the state of the art is highlighted here between Netflix and Blockbuster. How many of you work with Blockbuster as a customer? Blockbuster? Okay, very few. So this analogy doesn't ring a bell, but in the old days, when you wanted to watch a DVD, you would go to the store, get a DVD, and put it in your DVD player and watch it. Today's digital pathology is like Blockbuster. Diagnostician, you, go to the lab, ask for the glass slide that has the tissue sample on it, put it on the microscope and look at it. Very much like you watching a movie in a DVD player in your home. It's the same thing. Their DVD player is the microscope. That is Blockbuster and today's digital pathology. Netflix is the next version. You go online as a pathologist, you say, patient X, give me H&E. Okay, I know this is suspicious. Give me immunohistochemical stain A. Give me a PAS stain. On-demand content generation from the same thing. That's exactly what we want to do. For those of you who are kind of like, okay, I don't know what Blockbuster means, maybe you know this. How many of you had an analog camera that you had the film out, that you had to kind of wait for a few minutes for it to show up? That's essentially today's digital histology. We want to be the Kodak Canon digital images. So essentially, maybe the easier to understand comparison where we want to go. So deep learning and optics combination has been exciting. It's kept us live and fresh during the COVID and before. So, and it's generated a lot of interesting things. In the last couple of minutes, I want to very briefly share how it's also helped us to improve sensing, molecular sensing. So this is for those of you who are interested in point-of-care sensing, mobile sensing, a platform. technology that is powered by deep learning and functional approximation power of neural networks. So this is actually for computational sensing using paper-based biosensors. Anyone working here in point-of-care diagnostics? Sensing? Okay. Maybe this might inspire some of you to look into this. This is a multiplex paper-based sensor. It's a vertical flow assay. Of course, you know what a lateral flow assay is. This is how you tested yourself several times with COVID tests, right? This is a lateral flow test. At the heart of all of your COVID testing, 99.99% of all COVID testing happened through these lateral flow tests, which gave you an indicator, and it was looking at a single thing. So vertical flow assay technology is the sister of lateral flow assay. It shares the same principles, paper-based, rapid, 15 minutes, 20 minutes max. But vertical flow is kind of like the next level because it's multiplex. We can look at multiple analytes at the same time, up to 100 immunoreactions. Think of it like a single assay that has 100 assays in it, which means if you were to do the same thing with lateral flow tests, most likely you would have to do 100 of them. The contrast mechanism is the same. You can use gold nanoparticles or fluorescent particles, quantum dots, conjugated polymer nanoparticles. So there is some contrast mechanism using particles. All of your COVID tests were using what material for contrast? Gold. In your kitchen, you were diagnosing yourself with gold nanoparticles, 50 nanometer gold. That was given the color change if you were positive. So this is the same thing, same kind of an idea, but flow here is vertical, which means if you take a sample from the patient, this can be sputum, blood, serum, whatever, 50 microliters, let's say, or 20 microliters, it goes vertically and it activates these spots individually. And as a result, it provides you a quantitative way to look at a panel of biomarkers in the same serum sample. It's multiplex, it's quantitative, it's rapid, it's inexpensive. So all the good things that point-of-care sensors need. It must be rapid. That's why COVID lateral flow tests were great. They were fast, 15 minutes. Simple to use, same. Low-cost material. Most of it is paper-based, nitrocellulose-based. Now, deep learning here is using the information in these spots that you can configure for your purposes. And that's where this system gets smarter. It's a smart sensor, next-gen sensor. The first thing that we tested this is for Lyme disease testing. Anyone who knows what a Lyme disease is? It's a tick-borne disease. It's a terrible disease. I hope nobody gets it. It's hard to treat if you're not diagnosed early on. That's why early diagnostics and inexpensive point-of-care tests are very important. Lyme disease can be treated with antibiotics, but at an early stage. Today, it's a lab-based test. Typically, it will cost you $1,000 to do this because insurance companies would not pay for this. And it's very difficult to diagnose this. The reason is this. Bacteria that causes Lyme disease is hiding in your blood, in your body. It doesn't have a signature that you can detect reliably. It fluctuates. That means if I look at PCR from your blood, it won't help me to diagnose if you're positive or not. And that's why they never look at, for Lyme disease, tick-borne disease, the bacteria itself. They look at the immunity of the patient. They look at how IgG and IgM is synthesized within the patient sample. Now, here you see something like 50 different patients and the expression of IgM and IgG in their serum samples as for different antigens that you can synthesize. You can see a variation. That's the challenge of diagnosing these kinds of diseases where the immunity of the patient A versus patient B is different. And that's where learning helps. I can actually learn these by activating these vertical flow assays and understanding from the perspective of a neural net what it means to be Lyme positive and what it means to be Lyme negative. You cannot just look at a single vector here. It will fail you. You need to look at a panel of things, and you need to look at, not from a cutoff point of view, threshold point of view. You need to look at a firing in a nonlinear function approximator manner. That's what we've done. We have reconfigured using learning by activating these vertical flow assays with well-characterized serum samples, positive, well-characterized negative. We understood basically what we need to put on this membrane and how it should be read with a neural net, which was trained with serum samples. So literally, this is training where we pour in serum, get readout, and then understand how to call something positive, how to call something negative, Lyme positive, Lyme negative. And this showed us a beautiful blinded testing of a single vertical flow assay platform to do Lyme positive patient sampling, sensing, with a very good area under the curve on the order of 0.95, showing you that actually this system can be working even better with more samples helping us. The good thing here is this. In Europe, ticks are different. So Lyme disease in Europe is slightly different than Lyme disease in the US in terms of human response. We can reconfigure our tests to work differently in the US versus Europe versus other parts of the world. That's where deep learning helps you kind of also reconfigure what, where it's going to be used with what purpose. Another very exciting aspect of multiplex vertical flow assays is quantitative analysis of different kinds of biomarkers. We're also looking into cardiac biomarkers. Heart disease is one of the #1 killers in the world globally. And we have created tests, point of care tests, that can look into high sensitivity and rapidly, within 15 minutes, with a very low cost system, we can look into various different biomarkers, all the way from C-reactive protein, CRP. During COVID, this was very important. It's an inflammatory biomarker. We can, without being affected by very high concentrations, we have a beautiful linearity and sensitivity for CRP testing in serum samples. And recently we have applied this to basically triplex assays of 3 different cardiac biomarkers: myoglobin, CK, MB, FABP. These are important biomarkers that heart patients, cardiac patients would need to be tested. So this is a multiplex assay, which uses a fluorescence system. That's why we need a reader. We're using mobile phones or handheld devices to read and quantify these. It's also based on a neural network looking into concentration of these 3 biomarkers from a single cartridge. Less than 15 minutes, using only 50 microliters of serum sample, and you get sub-nanogram per mil sensitivity. In fact, with this kind of an assay, you can go to picogram per mil level of sensitivity if you want, with additional tricks. To summarize, deep learning is not just for imaging. It also has a lot to offer for next generation multiplex testing. And we are using paper-based assays, vertical flow assays, extremely fast, portable, quantitative, multiplexed, and sensitive, down to about a picogram per mil level of sensitivity can be achieved. All in all, I think computation, and in specific neural networks, has really transformed our tool set for optical imaging and sensing, and it's got even more future in this direction with potential to transform how we do things in biomedical sciences. With this, I'd like to conclude, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. I really wish to thank again the speaker for this very, very interesting talk, and for offering us this new perspective about microscopy, imaging in general. So I think that the first and maybe the main take-home message from this presentation is computational tools will affect greatly and significantly in years to come the microscopy field and imaging. So this is very important for us, that we'd like to develop and to use microscopy at the state of the art.
May I?
Please.
Thank you very much. I was really very much impressed from your talk because I am a little bit out of this particular field in the microscopic area, but more I'm working more on molecules, and so. Which are the importance, according to your experience, about the integration of these aspects, which is traditionally called the morphological aspect, with possibly study of molecules? You mentioned it now at the end of your talk that you can use for cardiac biomarkers, so means small molecules. For instance, this is a first question. And the second is just because I am a little bit naive on that, could you also improve the, for instance, the typology of different cancers, for instance, breast cancer? You say the 100%, so there is no improvement, or maybe in other cases, maybe improvement. At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned about histologically and label-free staining and no staining. Stains distort. They distort the tissue, and after you have to just draw out, and instead in virtual you can also reuse the, and so to make maybe more deepened analysis in that. But you know cases in which really the different typology of a type of cancer which is just mentioned as an overall typology in different ones that can be useful for therapy, for instance, because you have the possibility to make intra-operational, intra-surgery operation in very few minutes. And so you can have also the possibility to inspire your surgery by, as now is also made in some cases, before just waiting for the histological. And finally, the third
Before,
one,
let me answer,
yeah,
because
okay.
I will forget, right? I mean, so if you continue, then I will only answer your last question, just because short memory. So,
I don't believe that anyway.
all right.
Mine
Okay.
is a short memory because I'm much older than you, so
I'm jet lagged.
lagged.
I'm jet lagged, which is a form of.
Go ahead, please.
So, so the question about distortions, tissue distortions, and tissue morphology, it's really a problem actually for, especially cancer diagnostics and immunohistochemical stains. A lot of times, when the tissue block goes to the histology lab for these tedious staining procedures, there are mechanical distortions on the tissue level, which makes it impossible for professionals to diagnose. It's a known artifact. How bad it is? 30% of the tissue samples that go to histology labs for more advanced immunohistochemical stains, to for example, look into expression of certain biomarkers, 30% of them are unusable. It's
30%
of them are not.
much greater.
Yeah, so
value
that's
than-
where virtual staining is great, because virtual staining does not involve those mechanical distortions, those failures of the standard chemical staining, which is very good for diagnosticians, and which is good for the patient because we don't have to give more samples. In terms of intraoperative use of these kinds of virtual, it's a huge potential area where there is a need. Today, let's say there is a tumor removal. Let's say the surgeon is operating, there are margins of the tumor, and you take the tumor out. Well, how do you know you've taken enough? How do you know there is no residual left? This is today done with frozen section. Like, they take a tissue, literally rapidly, in about 30 minutes during the surgery, they stain it. Pathologist guides the surgeon to take more. This process happens oftentimes while the patient is in the room. And virtual staining might be a game changer for intraoperative use, eliminating that kind of thing. And in fact, You can have like Da Vinci, like the robotic arms that do remote surgery, also perform some of these tasks later on. However, the regulatory path for these things to be used with robotic surgery will take a while, because when you talk talk about robotic surgery and other kinds of imaging modalities to be incorporated, there are a lot of regulations on it. It's not just a matter of can you do it? Yes, we can do it. In the next 5 years, a robotic surgery arm can be doing virtual staining of one kind to guide the surgeon to say, okay, you've taken enough. There's no tumor left. Or, yes, you got to take more. But even though technology can be integrated in the next 5 years for that, regulatory processes for those kinds of automation will take longer, because robotic arms are kind of very sophisticated in terms of how they are regulated, what kinds of things you can do there. It's very rigorously decided by the FDA. That's where I think we will probably see that appear maybe in the next decade, hopefully.
Thank you. Just one more curiosity question is, do you know of work that has been on fibrillar? You know that in many pathology of human body, particularly when fibrils aggregate one with the other, the fibrils of this molecule, for instance, in folding and unfolding disease,
Yeah.
which are quite now more understood on the
Protein
pathogenesis, for instance, in brain,
Yeah.
Alzheimer, in
Yeah.
cardiac amyloid, and
Yeah.
everywhere you can get amyloid or some other type of growth. Can you distinguish the extent of these, because this may give the important hints in how old is the disease and how many fibrils you have in your body, which aggregates and can disrupt the cellular network, the
Yeah.
normal cellular network.
Yeah, amyloidosis. That's kind of like tissue amyloidosis, right?
Yeah.
So that's a huge problem, and it appears not only just brain everywhere, but people don't
Sure.
look for it. So the problem with amyloidosis is diagnosticians don't look for it. If you take a biopsy today about a certain age from a patient, any organ, you will see most likely crystals, protein crystals. What do they mean? We don't know. So going back to your question, can virtual staining technology help with the diagnosis of amyloidosis?
That's
Yes.
great.
Yes. For amyloidosis, there are two stains that are frequently done: Congo red and polarization staining. These crystals have polarization behavior. So that's something that virtual staining can replicate, because their signatures are very strong. Yeah. Crystals within tissue, yes, definitely. And the stains that they use are fairly simple stains that we can replicate.
May I make the last question concerning money? How much do you think some basic lab, what would be the expense for making up a lab concerning this technology you showed us? And I saw also many small devices, for instance, to look on the skin and so forth. So very approximately, how much do you think is the expensive? Because,
Research or clinical?
I think in many hospitals, in many let's say locations where we do diagnostic analysis, it can be very useful because of time, because
Yeah.
of precision, because of no distortion, and all the advantages you mentioned.
Yeah. So from a hospital point of view, if the hospital is not working on digital pathology already, which means if the hospital is old school, where they're storing tissue samples on glass slides, and every time they want to look at it, they look under a microscope without digitization, that's the previous decade's histology workflow. We call it glass-based. everything is on glass as opposed to digital. Now, if your hospital is one of those glass-based pathology workflow, you need to first upgrade it to a digital pathology workflow, where you're going to take digital slide scanners. Each is like 200 to 300K. 0.2 to 0.3K million is the cost of a slide scanner. How many of them do you need? Well, depends on your volume. If you have a high volume, 5, 10. Then you need to have digital storage, cloud services. What is the cost of something like this? In the United States, it's going to cost you maybe, today I think a little bit more expensive because of price increase in there, everything going with the inflation, maybe 4 or 5 million. Don't quote me on that, but probably 5 million would be a good for high volume systems. That is digital pathology. On top of that, virtual staining, it wouldn't cost you anything more. Just paying for the services. Like, virtual staining is not, of course, free, because that's what the company wants to make the money, right? So, yeah, sustain. So, but what I'm trying to say is, if you have a digital pathology workflow, we can surf on it. We don't need anything else.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thanks.
To be
Thanks.
so long.
More questions from the audience, please?
So I reckon this virtual staining will help harmonizing these images for pathologists. But can you do an extra step? So how do we harmonize pathologists' interpretation of this data?
Great. Virtual staining actually is like a black box that you can, if you're a pathologist, you cannot tell the difference if it's coming from histology lab or my computer. That means the main point of virtual staining is we're not replacing the diagnostician or its training. We're giving you the same images that you're trained to diagnose. Therefore, if you are a good pathologist, good for you. You will be even better with us. If you're a bad pathologist, bad for you, but you were not trained well, and I can do nothing about it. But I can maybe make a better use of your limited training by giving you very consistent images. For example, if you're a bad pathologist, trained poorly, unfortunately, let's say, you make more mistakes with histology. Why? Because sometimes histology came to you like this. Like let's look at this image. Let's say you're a bad pathologist, okay? You make more mistakes with these kinds of traditional images because sometimes it's good stain, sometimes it's bad stain. And you cannot tell the difference. And in fact, in this case, maybe you should say, hey, send me a new image. Cut a new slice. Well, with us, maybe a bad pathologist has a chance. So in other words, we don't replace the pathologist. That's why we're good friends with pathologists, yet. Because later we can, because
indeed, that was the next question. So
yeah.
Do you plan giving suggestions about
If you can't keep a secret, I can tell you. So not in the near future because of the FDA and other things, but these images are very good and they contain a lot of useful information. So down the line, AI might just prefer to use these as opposed to these, but it's yet to come. So for the time being, we're good partners.
Thank you.
More questions or comments?
Thank you. Out of curiosity, how far are you to actually using these systems in clinical applications? And if you are not close, why?
So the commercialization of this work is full speed moving forward, but there is basically a pyramid of opportunities ahead of us. Okay, at the top of the pyramid, which is the biggest impact and the biggest money, is primary diagnosis. You send me a sample from a patient, and for the patient's diagnosis, we want to use virtual staining. That's called primary diagnosis. That's FDA regulated, and to hit that, you need to be going through a class 3 approval process through the FDA. That's more costly, and probably it's better to leave it to the later stages. At the bottom of the pyramid, easier to reach, is animal studies. Every pharma company, to launch their new drug, let's say there's a new cancer drug, right? It goes through an animal study with animal tissue, toxicology. That's where virtual staining will first enter. And we have already, not shown here, but we have already screened the entire animal models with virtual staining. It works beautifully well in animal models. And it's even more important with animal models. Why? Animal tissue is tiny. The spleen of the animal, mouse, rat, they're tiny. If you want to get the most out of it, you don't want to do 10 stains, because then, hey, there's nothing left. That's where tissue preservation feature of virtual staining is very attractive. And for pharma, speed is money. If you launch your product 1 month earlier, it's millions of dollars for you. So they're ready to pay early. And that's where virtual staining is great, because it's chemistry-free, supply chain-free. Which means during the COVID, for example, a factory in India closed that produces these stains. What do you do as a pharma? You wait till they're open. Those things are also major bottlenecks. Reliance on high-quality supply chain, which we don't, which is very important.
More question?
Yeah. Thank you. Just a question. How much is the result of virtual staining affected by the quality of the images captured with like fluorescence or
a lot?
label-free?
Yeah, a lot. A lot. So let me see if I have an artifact to show you. I should have a slide at the very end of somewhere to show you an artifact. Do I have it here? Okay, it's in the other one. Let me open another. This one, I think, should do it. So, image quality is very important. Yeah, for example, this is an artifact. This is, for example, this is Mason's trichome, and we've got here a green. Let me show you with pointer. So this is a Mason's trichome that's virtually stained, and somehow we got this green thing going on there, right? I mean, like in Mason's trichome, there's no green, and we were getting green, and at the heart of it is basically a dust particle that landed on that tissue that was autofluorescing, that was giving you a hallucination here. But that's a very good hallucination, because that's very much like an artifact of a human histotechnology. Sometimes when humans stain it, they tear tissue by mistake, a corner of it. It doesn't matter, because the rest is still usable. When I do a biopsy on you, I don't take all of your tissue, right? As a result, leaving some tissue out to garbage is okay. So as long as I don't mislead you, that's okay. Now here is a good hallucination where it's entirely created by this dust particle that landed on that slide. Now, that's showing you what happens with your model if unexpected things aberrate your system. Now, this was not the optics. This was a beautiful, probably a microscope from Olympus. Now, if your microscope has its own fingerprint on the objective, giving these kinds of aberrations, well, you're going to hallucinate. It's a very good example, because that is a dust particle. It could also be an problem with your objective or optics. That would also kill you. But the good thing is that histologist scanners are like tanks. You cannot touch them. You know, a histologist scanner is not like a traditional microscope. You cannot touch the objective lens for a reason.
May I make the very last question for me? We work on organoids, and we have a lot of work with wet chemistry to match the organoids we make with the tumor tissue that exists in vivo, that we we get out from the patient,
Yeah.
and we want to be exactly the same. So we have to match biochemically or with molecular biology technique, for instance, DNA sequencing or also RNA or other means. But I think with this technique, maybe it would be, have you an idea if this has been checked? For precision medicine, it's very important that what you make in organoids, test with your drugs, should be the same tissue that really existed in the patient. So this matching might be according to the technique you described, quite important. Maybe I don't know if exist already examples of that.
I don't know if people did that kind of study by taking an organoid, let's say a millimeter diameter or 2 millimeters in diameter, and section it and looked into stained versions of it and compared to histology from the patient's biopsy to see if the morphology is the same. I don't know if anybody did that. It will be interesting to look into sectioning of organoids to see structural resemblance under staining. If there is, then virtual staining could definitely be applicable. Yeah.
Thank you.
More questions and comments? Okay, so Vittorio, please.
This is related to the previous question because Professor Salvatore mentioned the organoids. Can deep learning solve the problem of scattering from multiple scattering from thick sections of a tissue or structures like an organoid or even model animals, like model samples?
So, as you know, there is a paper by a few groups in parallel that use networks to basically learn sections. So basically, this is important because there's a lot of confusion about this, so I need to kind of clarify, because if I say it wrong, I will give the wrong message to the field. So they took a neural network and trained it where every layer was basically what they're trying to slice up as a reconstruction. So, but that's different than what I've shown throughout my talk, because my models are network models that take microseconds to execute because they're fixed. And for computational microscopy, I work with fixed neural networks. Training takes a while, but after that, it works for any blind sample in microseconds, right? Now, another approach that relates to your question is taking the framework of neural network, and it's an iterative reconstruction method. So you can take a neural net as an iterative reconstruction method. Then you lose all the advantages of neural networks, because that's not using the neural net for fast inference. That's using the neural net as an iterative optimizer. Every single object, test sample, organoid 1, organoid 2, organoid 3, will have separate measurements, that's separate reconstructions. And every network, at the end of what you get out of it, will be trashed. It won't be used for anything new. So that's an early generation of ideas that looked into multi-scattering processes to be modeled within the network optimization process. You can think of it as a physics-inspired iterative solution. So it's again losing all the advantages of neural networks. And every new object, you need to train it from scratch, which means it's iterative reconstruction, where at the heart of it, you inject neural nets and its optimizer. That is a way to go if you don't have throughput pressure, because it's a very slow task. I think that's a good way to go. At the end of the day, for multi-scattering, the rule of the game is signal to noise ratio. Whatever you're measuring, how well is the signal to noise ratio with your forward model? And the only way to synthetically increase your signal to noise ratio is to do redundant experiments. Redundant angular diversity, shifts, delta z, angle of the plane of measurement. All of these are, if you are precisely made with the same SNR, it's going to improve your resilience, and you will solve the inverse problem better with neural nets or other ways. It's an SNR problem. And fundamentally, any optimizer, neural net-based optimizers, others, will hit that SNR problem. There's diffraction limit is SNR. There's no physical limit. Evanescent waves, they're not the cause of diffraction limit. Diffraction is an information limit, SNR limit. Whether there's evanescent wave or not, it's not an information loss. And that's why SNR is at the heart of everything. If measurement diversity hits your SNR, you won't gain. That means when you are doing additional measurements, you must maintain the SNR and precision of what you know that you've done, like delta z angle. If you make an error in the angle, good luck. Yeah, so that's my take on it.
So the thickness of the, for example, of the tissues that you work with. For example, you start from autofluorescence, right? And what is the thickness of this
Typically
tissue?
3-4 micron. Standard histology is 3-4. We've done it 10. So microtomes, some of them are 10 micron sections. 3-4 standard. Most of it's 3-4, because that's what 99% of all the labs are using.
Yeah. Okay.
For amyloidosis, though, it's a different story. They're thicker. There's a reason for it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again. Let's thank again Professor Aydogan and Ozcan for the
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.